Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I'm ranking every short story in the 13 Problems or the Tuesday Night Club collection, starring Miss Marple and a cast of her so called friends. I really enjoyed the setup to this collection where we have two separate gatherings where each guest in attendance tells a mystery and has the others guess what the solution to the problem is. And much of the excitement from this collection comes not from the stories themselves, but from everyone's reactions to how Miss Marple is the only person who can solve the mystery or even propose an actually intelligent suggestion, and the reaction to everyone's really dumb suggestions when they attempt to make a guess. This collection features some great characters like Raymond West, the Bantries, and Sir Henry Clithering. I think this is a very strong collection, but I think there are some clunkers here. Unlike the Poirot Investigates and Partners in Crime collections, which I thought even the lower ranked novels were at least decent, but there are a few duds, with the majority of still being pretty good here. But I'll get into that. And fair warning, there are spoilers ahead, including some of the solutions. Starting at the bottom with number 13 is one that I believe is highly regarded amongst fans, but I just don't like it, and that is Mr. Pretherick's story of motive versus opportunity. Mr. Pretherick is a lawyer, and he tells the story of one of his clients, Simon Claude, who wants to write a new will in favor of this spiritual medium couple named the Spraggs, who may or may not be frauds. After the client dies, the will is blank. Now, I think the fundamental problem here is interesting. All the people who have a motive to dispose of that will, that would be the client's family, who were disinherited, didn't ever have the opportunity to take the will, while the Spraggs, who have no reason to switch the will, did have the opportunity to do so. The problem for me is that the solution is not good. The family had ordered a maid to give Claude a pen filled with vanishing ink if he ever wanted to rewrite his will. This trick was used similarly in a previous short story, and it was much better and it was also more original there. I also take issue with the resolution of this, where the lawyer is just totally okay with this. And we don't even get confirmation the Spraggs were frauds. Now, it's highly implied they were, but there is some serious injustice and law breaking going on here, and it's just brushed off as totally fine. And I don't think the mystery, other than the concept itself, is really that strong or compelling. So motive versus opportunity comes in at the bottom here at number 13. At number 12 is one that just doesn't do anything for me, and that is The Companion. And this story is told by Dr. Lloyd, who was on vacation in the Canary Islands, where he came across a woman and her companion named Miss Barton and Miss Durant. And Miss Durant drowns, and a witness alleges that Miss Barton drowned her, but other people said no. And a few weeks later, the doctor learns that Miss Barton has also drowned back in England. I just found this case to be pretty obvious here. I mean, Miss Durant was the employer, not the companion, and a lot of this trickery involves the two women being unfamiliar to everyone. I found it pretty obvious from the start, and I just wasn't impressed by the tricks here. It also has this ridiculous ending where the doctor sees Miss Barton in Australia after she faked her death to claim an inheritance in the foreign country. And it was just also bizarre. And I also think Christie does similar plot lines much better in other short stories and novels. So the companion falls well short and comes in here at number 12. At number 11, and this is the last one I have major issues with, and that is A Christmas Tragedy. And what places this one this low is just how bizarre and ridiculous the whole story is. It's also one of Miss Marple's stories, so I did feel it should have been one of the stronger ones in the collection. And Miss Marple basically spoils the ending at the beginning of her tale when she says she knew this man was going to kill his wife the minute she met them. And the plot itself is interesting, where Miss Marple is on holiday and comes across this couple named Sanders. But the solution is just so bizarre, where Mr. Sanders somehow manages to pass off the dead body of a maid who died from blood poisoning quite naturally as his wife's, which establishes his own alibi when he does finally kill his wife. But the how is just utterly absurd, because in order to pull this off, he has to carry around multiple dead bodies, store them, and all without being seen in a busy hotel resort. It really strains credulity in my head. It works if you can suspend belief, but the fact that Miss Marple tells this story knocks it down even further. As the star of the collection, I really felt she deserved a better story to tell than this one. The story is entertaining nonetheless, which is why it's not at the very bottom, but I just did not think this was of particularly good quality. So A Christmas Tragedy comes in at number 11. At number 10 is a story I feel like we've seen multiple times from Christie, even at this short time in her career, and that is The Herb of Death. And I feel like we have multiple iterations of this story from Christie and other authors as well, where a bunch of people fall sick and one of them dies, and everyone believes that the poison mushroom somehow made its way into with the good ones. It's really been done to death in the Golden Age, and this is just more of the same thing. There's even another story in this collection that has a very similar plot, although that one is much better. In addition, I have a number of problems with this one in otherwise. Mechanically, I don't think it works. This is one of those stories where someone is slowly fed poison and it doesn't kill them or make them sick. I just don't think that's what really happens in real life. The reason why I have the Herb of Death this high is because I think some of the mechanics are interesting had they been realistic. Feeding someone small amounts of poison earlier in the day so they die from a larger dose that only sickens everyone else is clever. And I think the murderer's motive is also very clever, where the killer doesn't want his ward to marry anyone else because he's in love with her, so he kills her. I think there are some positive elements here, but I'm mostly critical of it, so it does come in here relatively low at number 10. At number 9 is a short story that I really don't find that interesting and but I don't have any problems with it, and that is Ingots of Gold, which is told by Raymond West. And straight up, I find this mystery to be pretty boring. Raymond's friend is tied up and kidnapped while searching for long lost treasure of gold. It's all a ruse, and he's in on the plot. But the best part of the story is Miss Marple's constant ripping on her nephew during this party is by far and away the best part, and it's brutal. First off, she suggests Raymond's friend John Newman must be a criminal because no one else would want to be friends with him, and she also rips him for his poor judgment when dealing with other people, and for him to not even know the solution to the story he just told, even though that was one of the requirements of the party. I enjoy the sequence so much. It's one of the best parts of the entire collection, but I do have to put Ingots of Gold this low because it really does nothing to do with the actual mystery being told, which I do think is the most important factor here when I rank these, but it is a delightful smackdown of Raymond West by his Aunt Jane, and one that I can read over and over again. And Ingots of Gold comes in here at number 9. At number 8, and we're starting to get into the better ones now, with this one being a bit unusual but entertaining, and that is The Affair of the Bungalow. And this one is a bit different. It's told by actress Jane Hellier, who is something of an idiot, and her story doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just sort of rambling and contradictory tale of a robbery at a bungalow involving some rich people and an actress, and the man arrested allegedly sent his manuscript to Jane, but then he says the woman he met wasn't Jane Hellier. The story is rambling, nonsensical, and initially it seems like this is just because Jane is an idiot, but it's the reality of the story that lifts it up for me. Miss Marple deduces that this story never happened. Jane made it up because she wants to pull off a similar scheme in the future, and she was testing if she could pull it off. It reminded me somewhat of Gerda Christo from The Hollow, who was also a bit of a simpleton and really couldn't pull off her plot. And there are multiple clues to indicate this. Not only is Jane clearly making the story up on the fly, but earlier in the collection, she said that she didn't even have a story to tell. So I think the story's brilliance, like Ingots of Gold, comes from things outside of the story proper, but it's very enjoyable and clever nonetheless. So The Affair at the Bungalow comes in here at number 8. And now for number 7, and this is where I think the superb stories begin. And at number 7 here, I have The Blue Geranium. And I talked a bit about this one in my Miss Marple adaptation video because it was adapted by that series, and the story is still pretty strong. It's a traditional murder mystery. The victim is Mrs. Pritchard, a wealthy invalid who is warned by a fortune teller that a blue geranium means death. So naturally, the red geranium on Mrs. Pritchard's wallpaper turns blue the evening she dies. And I think the obfuscation is fantastic, where this appears to be another Christie story where the husband offs his burdensome rich wife to marry the pretty young girl. And no matter how many times Christie or any other author uses this trick, the reader typically does fall for it. The husband usually has an alibi or whatever, but here, this is just a trick. The husband is innocent. and the true killer is her former nurse who dressed as the fortune teller. I think the story is insanely clever, but the reason why I don't have it higher is because there are some logistical issues that such as applying the litmus paper to the wallpaper flowers. It seems really difficult to pull off physically. I do think the trick of the gas turning the red litmus paper blue works, but it's the application of the litmus paper in the first place that seems a bit odd and a bit clunky. So the blue geranium does come at the bottom of these superb titles here at number 7. At number 6 is one with some supernatural elements, and that is The Idle House of Astarte. And this one is very well fleshed out. There's a costume party at this house that once held pagan rituals, or at least the land did hundreds of years ago. The murder victim is Sir Richard Hayden, who was apparently stabbed to death when no one was around him. And the story has a fantastic setup and atmosphere. There's a lot of effort into establishing this gloomy, mooning tone. It feels eerie, but not outright into the supernatural. I think the cluing here is also very good, where we are supposed to be paying attention to everyone's costumes for clues, but we're never really told this, but we are told how everyone is dressed. And I think this was expertly done. The reason why I don't have this one higher is because there are a lot of characters in this story, and many of them are just there with no real characterization other than their costumes, which makes the reveal a bit less shocking as there really was only one true viable suspect, in my opinion. But The Idle House of Astarte is a fantastic short story that comes in here at number 6. Number 5 is one that I've always loved, even though it is a bit ridiculous at times, and that is The Thumb Mark of St. Peter. And this is Miss Marple's other story she tells, and it's much better and a lot of fun, but a little weird. Miss Marple helps her niece Mabel, who is recently widowed, and there's a lot of gossip in her village that she poisoned her husband Geoffrey, who died in the middle of the night after allegedly eating some poisoned mushrooms. So we have that plot twice in this collection, and this one is far superior. He utters some cryptic words, which I'm never a fan of, but I actually do like this one. The servant said he was speaking nonsense about fish and piles of fish, and eventually Miss Marple figures out he said pilocarpine, which is an antidote for atropine poisoning, which indicates that he was poisoned by his father's eye drops. And for me, this puzzle is a bit of a stretch to solve, but one that I love nonetheless. Miss Marple really has to pull out the exact words out of Geoffrey said from the servants, and she gets to pilocarpine sort of by random chance and a little bit of divine intervention. It's not really within keeping within the rules of detective fiction, but I find the puzzle worth it, and it's not like 100% random. But, like I said in previous videos, I do assess short stories a little bit differently than I would with a full-length novel. So I think a story like this can get away with it. She does explain how she solves it, and she does use her sleuthing skills, but this story is very clever, and I have a lot of fun with this. So the thumb mark of St. Peter comes in here at number 5. At number 4 is a fantastic short story that almost feels like a full-length novel, and that is The Four Suspects. And this one reminds me of like a miniature version of Cards on the Table. A British secret agent named Dr. Rosen is murdered, and there are four suspects, which is a lot typically for a Christie short story, but the mystery is still very well developed. A lot of focus is given to this random postcard slash letter the doctor received the day he died, which doesn't make any sense, and he doesn't know any of the people mentioned in it. The suspects are the doctor's niece Greta, his servant Gertrude, his gardener Dobbs, and his secretary Charles Templeton, who is considered the main suspect, although nothing can be proven against him. Charles is suspected because he just seems to be the person most likely to be an enemy agent, and he also received a letter the same day that he threw away. I like the obfuscation a lot in this one, and I think the mystery plot is a full plot. Christie goes in depth detail wise, and we get a sense of who each of these characters are. The reason why it's not higher on the list is because of the major clue that allows Miss Marple to solve it. The letter for Dr. Rosen was signed by Georgine, which apparently means Dahlia in German, and Dahlias represent betrayal and death. And there are other words indicating to Dahlia's, which is code for his niece to kill her uncle. And I just never would have gotten this. I don't, it's not like this is an unfair clue, but and this is very obscure. And I would challenge really anyone to figure it out from that Georgine Dahlia clue. And I think this clue just simply doesn't work for me or for most readers. So it does make it a little bit of a knock. So the four suspects does fall down the list to here at number four. At number three is the titular story of the collection, The Tuesday Nightclub. And the title doesn't actually describe the story, but the group of people who are assembled. And the story is a murder mystery, very similar to The Herb of Death, but much better. Mr. and Mrs. Jones and her companion, Miss Clark, all fell ill from food poisoning, and Mrs. Jones died. The obvious suspect is Mr. Jones because his wife held the purse strings, but there's no clear evidence here. However, someone reports that Mr. Jones talked about, quote, hundreds and thousands, unquote, which makes it sound like he murdered his wife for her money. However, he doesn't inherit nearly anywhere near that amount. He just has like a much smaller sum of money. The story is so much fun, and Christie constantly plays with the reader here. This is a case of incriminating the guilty party, although somewhat accidentally. Mr. Jones did poison his wife, or rather, he made the maid Gladys do it. Jones got Gladys pregnant and then basically manipulated her into killing his wife by disguising arsenic as sprinkles, which were also called hundreds and thousands. And Mr. Jones scraped off the sprinkles off the trifle, and Miss Clark was dieting, so she didn't eat dessert. The case is a lot of fun, and there are a lot of working parts to this that come together to form a very strong, entertaining short story. And this is also the first in the collection, and that means this is the first introduction to Miss Marple, who is the only person to solve this, and it establishes her as a force to be reckoned with for the first time. So it's an important story into the Christie universe as well, which moves it up the list, and it comes in here at number three. At number two is actually the final story I have to cover that was told in the form of a story at the dinner party, and that is The Blood-Stained Pavement. And this one reminded me a lot of Evil Under the Sun, although there is a different short story that novel is based on. This one is told by Raymond West's date Joyce, a painter. Joyce was at a seaside resort where a woman named Carol disappeared, and eerily, Joyce unknowingly painted bloodstains on her canvas despite not seeing them. I found this aspect of the story to be very spooky and really set the tone for me very well. Carol just happened to come across her friends Dennis and Marjorie at this resort, and Joyce leaves the area without this story being resolved, but it's presumed Carol is safe. But then she reads later that Marjorie is the one who actually drowned. And there's some great clues here, specifically the red bathing suit. Joyce saw two bathing suits drying at the time she painted those bloodstains, one of which was red, and the blood was not visible on the bathing suit because of its color, which indicates that a murder had already happened by that point. And what we have here is a classic Christie plot brilliantly executed. The couple is not Dennis and Marjorie, but Dennis and Carol, with Dennis and Carol being serial killers who kill off wealthy women Dennis marries to claim the insurance, and Carol impersonates the wife at various times to obscure the time of death. It's a very clever little scheme that is interesting to read. The reason why I don't have it at number one is because of just a very small detail where Joyce apparently came across Dennis and Carol in another location pulling off the same scheme, and that was just too much of a coincidence for me to swallow, but it does not harm what is otherwise a fantastic short story. So The Bloodstained Pavement comes in here at number two. At number one, in the top spot, is the lone story in the collection that we actually experience as it's happening, and that is Death by Drowning. And this is sort of the 13th story that's sort of just tagged on to the end. It doesn't really fit in the collection with the other two groups of stories. Miss Marple begs Sir Henry to listen to her because she believes the wrong person is about to be arrested for murder. The victim is Rose Emmett, a girl who is pregnant and drowned in the river. The local gossip is that it's suicide, but Miss Marple knows it's murder, and she knows who did it, but she fears the wrong person could be arrested if the police investigate. Rose has two suitors, the wealthy Rex, who is the father of the baby, and the blue-collar Joe, who didn't mind raising the child as his own. And it seems like one of these two men must have killed Rose, with Rex being the prime suspect. And much of the story focuses on which of these two men did it. And that's what makes this story just stand out because neither of them did it. The actual murderer is Joe's landlady, who was in love with Joe and didn't want him to marry Rose. The Miss Marple knows from early on because of her keen observations of people in St. Mary Mead, something she used in all of those previous stories to solve by making comparisons to people in the story to the people she knew in her village of St. Mary Mead. This would go on to be her main sort of modus operandi in her future appearances. This is such a clever mystery, brilliantly executed, and it ties together the collection very well. So it deserves the top spot and comes in here at number one. And that's it for today. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. If you're new to the channel, make sure you check out my past videos on Christie and other Golden Age novelists. Next week, I will be ranking all 12 stories in the Labors of Hercules collection, which is generally considered her best short story collection, but we'll see what I think about it. Until next time, Mystery Files.